Alright, so guys, this will actually go along with the Chapter 2 Lesson 1 instead of the Chapter 2 Activity 1. I'm going to put this video together here for you really quick. It might not follow exactly what you have in the textbook, but it should help you out with the assignment. So the first set of instructions will tell you to write an equivalent fraction. Now, what we can do here is a couple things. As long as you are multiplying or dividing, anything that you take the top and bottom times will work, or top and bottom divided by will work. On this first one, since this is just 2 over 3, you can't divide anything into both 2 and 3, so what I'm going to do for my first fraction is simply just take it times 2 on the top and bottom. When I multiply by 2 on top, this new fraction is going to be 4 for my numerator over 6 for my denominator. Notice here when I take it times 2 over 2, the value of 2 over 2 itself is 1, you guys, so I'm really not changing the value of my fraction, I'm just changing the way it looks. I can do another one here. Let's say the same fraction. Again, I need to write two equivalent fractions. I'm going to take it times, instead of 2 over 2 this time, let's say I'm going to take it times 10 over 10. Once again, notice how the value of this is still 1. If I take 10 divided by 10 here, I get 1. So I'm not changing the value, I'm just changing the way my fraction looks. 2 times 10 on top is going to be 20. 3 times 10 on bottom is going to be 30. So two equivalent fractions to 2/3 is 4 over 6 and 20 over 30. And again, you guys can take it times any number you want. I wouldn't necessarily divide on this one because we don't have a number that will go into both of these evenly. If you guys want to try example 2 before you watch me work it out, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and work on here. This first one, if you notice, we have 10 over 12. Now we can actually divide on this one. So if I go to do this one, what I would say is I'm going to go ahead and take it times, or excuse me, I'm going to divide by 2 on top, and I'm going to divide by 2 on bottom. Again, notice that 2 over 2 is actually equal to 1. So what I'm really dividing this fraction by isn't changing the value, it's just changing the way it looks. If I take 10 divided by 2 on top, I get 5. I take 12 divided by 2 on bottom, and I get 6. So there's one equivalent fraction to 10 over 12, and it's 5 over 6. Another thing I can do here real quick, you're alright, is let's say 10 over 12, same fraction, 10 over 12, and let's go ahead and multiply by 2 this time instead of dividing. When I multiply by 2 on top and on bottom, we get something that looks like this. Again, notice that that value is 1. 10 times 2 is 20. 12 times 2 on bottom is going to be 24. So now again, in your homework it will say write two equivalent fractions. It's just as easy as this, you guys. If your fraction happens to be something that's already in simplest form, let's say it's 2/3 or something like 5 over 6 and it can't be simplified anymore, what I would do is simply take it times two numbers instead of trying to divide by a number. So that should be pretty easy for that part. So the second piece, you guys, is not as challenging as it may look. We're comparing fractions on this part. What I need to do is basically make these two fractions have a common denominator before I can compare them, because I can't just look at 4 over 5 and say whether or not it's bigger than 16 over 30. So first what we need to do is look to find a common denominator. If I write out the factors of 5, or excuse me, the multiples of 5, I'm going to start with 5. 5 times 1 is 5. 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 3 is 15. 4 is 20. 5 is 25. And 6 is 30. So if I multiply 5 times 6, I actually get to 30. And that's what I'm going to do. Now that may not always be the case that this number will multiply up to something that equals that number, but this one it does. So I'm not even going to list my multiples of 30. I'm going to go straight into finding a common denominator here. So what I do now is take both of these, the top and the bottom, times 6. Now my new fraction for this one is going to be, let's see, 4 times 6 is 24. 5 times 6 is 30. Now when I go to compare these, they have the common denominator, and I can just look at the numerators. Clearly we have 24 is bigger than 16 on the left hand side, so now I know that 4/5 is greater than 16 over 30. Again, if you'd like to try this before I work it out, you can. This one's a little bit different because you're going to have to change both denominators. Again, I'm going to go ahead and work it. You guys can try it on your own. I'm going to do the same thing I did on the last one. I'm going to start with my smaller denominator and list the multiples. 4 times 1 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 3 is 12, 4 is 16, 5 is 20, 6 is 24, 7 is 28. And again, since I just took it times 7, I'm going to go ahead and start with my 7s because I got clear to a multiple of 7 there. 7 times 1 is 7. 7 times 2 is 14, times 3 is 21, times 4 is 28. So basically what we're going to have to do here is multiply 7 times 4. If I multiply the denominator, I have to do it to the numerator also. Then I'm going to take this fraction times 7. I'm going to change both fractions here and then compare. So now if I change the fraction on the left hand side, 3 times 4 I get 12. 7 times 4 I get 28. On the right hand side I take 1 times 7, get 7. 4 times 7 I get 28. Now that they have a common denominator, I can just look at the numerators and I see that 3 over 7 is greater than 20, that 3 over 7 is greater than 1 over 4. So again, that's how that section is done, and that's the comparing fractions section. Not too challenging. Okay, this last piece, you guys, is kind of the main idea of the lesson. We are simplifying fractions today. So the first thing I want to do before I start actually simplifying these is explain to you guys that the numbers that we're going to start with here are some of our smaller prime numbers. I tell my students to do that because if they overthink it and try to divide by the greatest common factor, sometimes we can't remember how to find the greatest common factor. So what I'm going to do is tell you basically if you start simplifying by dividing out primes, you guys are always going to remember how to do this. So if I start by dividing out primes, and again, primes are numbers like 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, and so on. You probably won't go much farther than that, but I would continuously just keep dividing out those numbers. So if we look at example 1 here, I can take 12 over 24 and I can divide by 2. Since they're both even, that's pretty easy. 12 divided by 2, I get 6. Over 24 divided by 2, I get 12. Now again, these are both even, so I can still divide both of these by 2. Then I get 3 over 6. Now these aren't both even, but if we look here, 3 and 6, those are both multiples of 3, so what I can do is divide by 3, and I get 1 over 2, and that's my final answer. I can't simplify anymore because my numerator is 1. I can't divide by anything to keep that a whole number, and again 2 is also prime, so that's going to stay, and that's going to be as simple as we can make it. This next one, you guys, we have example 2. If we look here, if we look at our dividing out our primes, 2 doesn't go into 17. 3 goes into 30, but if we take 17 divided by 3, it doesn't go in. 5 doesn't go into either. 7 doesn't go in. 11 doesn't go in. 13 doesn't go in. So the next prime number is actually 17. So since 17 is prime and it doesn't go into 30, you guys, this one is already in simplest form. So this is already simplified. I put this example in here because your textbook may do this to you also. So that one's done. You don't really need to do anything. Now 108 and 240, this is one where maybe we want to look for something a little bit bigger than 2. You don't necessarily have to. But if we look back up at example number 1, so let's say I divided by 2 times and 3 once. If I do this and I say 2 So 2 times 2 times 3, if I multiply that all up, 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12. If I would have just divided by 12 from the very beginning, I would have got this answer in one step. So what we can do with 108 and 240, I'm going to actually find the greatest common factor in this example. Again, if you don't want to do this method, you can always do this method here. So the greatest common factor method, what I do is I basically write out my two numbers. So I'm going to start with 108, and then I'm going to also write 240 here, and then I'm going to write my ladder and break these down by the primes. Now how this works is whatever they share is what you can divide by. So if I take 108 divided by 2, I get 54. If I divide that by 2, I get 27. I divide that by 2, it can't do it, but I can divide it by 3, and that comes down to 9. That comes down 3, 3, 3, and 1. So we want 1 at the bottom always when we break this down into our prime factorization. Next one, 240, I'm going to divide by 2 and I get 120. Divide by 2 and I get 60. Divide by 2 and I get 30. Divide by 2 again and I get 15. Divide by 2, I can't do it, but I can divide by 3. I get 5. 5 is a prime, so there's my 1 at the bottom. Now basically here's what makes this a little bit easier. Whatever numbers these guys share, I can divide by that number after I multiply it up, and it can be one step. So they share one factor of 2, they share 2 factors of 2, and they don't share any more factors of 2, but they share another factor of 3. So if I take 2 times 2 times 3, so 2 times 2 times 3, I get 12. And now if I divide by 12 on top and bottom, that's actually going to be as simple as I can get it. So if I take 108 divided by 12 on top, I get 9. If I take 240 divided by 12 on bottom, I get 20. Now if you look at this, 9 over 20, these guys don't share anything, and that's actually simplified there. So here are the two methods. If we want to, we can break it down by our primes right here and simplify the fraction all at once, or what we can do is we can do our prime factorization of each number and then take the ones that they share, they both have to have the numbers, and then divide by that number. A lot of my students prefer this method. That's fine. Some of your bigger numbers, it might be easier to do this method. Whatever you guys prefer to do, that's fine with me. Your assignment is up on the board, you guys, and that's all we have for today. Again, the story problems are going to be dealing with simplifying fractions, so just kind of read through it carefully, and if you guys need help, I'll help you out tomorrow in class. Thanks. Have a nice day.